Hey everyone, Park Howell here, and welcome to the Business of Story. My new book, Brand Bewitchery, is out on Amazon. You can order your print or Kindle version right now at bit.ly/Brand Bewitchery book, or just search for it on Amazon. And you know what a new author's best friend is? Well, next to his reader, it's your rating and review. Helps me be found on Amazon. So if you're up for it, please leave me one, because, well, it's a jungle out there. What are the power words that work in your business storytelling? Well, it depends who your audience is and their view of the world. You can use words that work for you and words that can destroy your communication. Candice Frazer, Senior Vice President of TTI Success Insights, the revealer of human potential based in Scottsdale, Arizona, joins us today to show you how to find words that'll work in your brand and business storytelling. And stick around for the end of the show for 2 bonus resources you can use immediately to captivate your customers. Candice is a former Fortune 500 leader who has worked with many top brands. She thrives at the intersection of marketing, human resources, and operations, and is a fan of the Entrepreneurial Operating System, or EOS for those of you in the know. I certainly am not, but we learn about it later in the show. Her superpower? Organizing the chaos and embracing visions not often seen by others. Today, we'll explore the 12 driving forces, words that work and words that don't, with 6 different kinds of audiences. You can download the PDF we'll be referring to in our show notes. So let's get after it. Please welcome to the Business of Story, Candice Frazer. Candice, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Park. I'm so excited to be here.
We got acquainted, 3 years ago? Something like that. You reached out and I did a storytelling session at one of your annual conferences, and then we just reunited during this whole COVID nightmare and did a webinar for a number of your TTI entrepreneurs, and that was great fun.
It was a tremendous amount of fun, Park. And, I have to say, I discovered you through the podcast. So this is coming full circle for me.
Oh, it is. Do you remember what show it was by chance?
I think it might have been one of the Randy Olson ones that really just totally lit up my life in a whole new way. So once I heard the ABT format, I was all in. But I really appreciated how you navigated so many different conversations and provided so many different perspectives on this podcast. So I was using it for my commute back and forth to work, and it was helping me every day. So totally full circle for me, Park.
Well, that's cool. And you were on our Facebook group yesterday when Randy and I did some live coaching with 3 very, very brave souls. And that was a lot of fun working through the ABTs.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun to be able to see. And we got some really great takeaways there in terms of when does the butt show up? Right. If it shows up a bit too early, maybe you've got a little bit more selling to do there. I really appreciated that insight. So really fun to go a bit deeper. And you've got your session coming up here in a few weeks. I signed up for that one too. I just can't get enough of this stuff.
Awesome. So you're going to be there, and that's our ABT in marketing. And for those of you that might be new to the show, the ABT stands for the and, but, therefore narrative framework. And it's something that I learned after I went the hard route. I went and first looked at the hero's journey and boiled that down to the story cycle system, and then mapped that to business and brought it in and used it for story strategy, brand strategy, crafting. And it was in that journey of pulling that all together that I met Randy and his work in the science community in particular and communicating. And he introduced me through his second book called Connection to this process called the and, but, and therefore. And it is the most beautiful, most eloquent, simple way to capture a focused, clear theme for anything that you're trying to communicate. And Candice, I know you use the ABT a lot. You really rely on it.
I use it personally. And when I first heard the format and compared it to the end format or the despite, however, yet format, really became very clear for me how stories can go off track. So I started using it personally first, Park. in order just to kind of test it out and see how it worked. And it worked really well personally. And then I started using it professionally in just every dimension of anything that I do.
Yeah, it's cool because you can use it across the board in communication. In fact, yesterday in preparing for that Facebook Live, I got 2 notes from 2 separate people. One guy who's in the radio sales business, and he said, I used the ABT on my wife so I could get access to her PayPal account. And I said, dude, that's just very, come on, you got to be careful, Jim. Where are you going with that?
Taking it a little too far maybe in that moment, but it is very persuasive. He's got a point. So
well, and then I heard from Jessica. She was one of my students, my grads from Arizona State University when I was teaching there this whole story process. And she sent me a note and she said she taught her daughters how to use the ABT in storytelling, and they became the 5th grade speakers at their graduation this year. And out of all of the presentations that were proposed, her 2 daughters got in. And she goes, I swear to God, it's because of the ABT in storytelling.
It is. And that just goes to show how simple it is, right? And if a 5th grader can apply it, then anybody can apply it. And I love that it transcends into elementary school settings. That's amazing.
Yeah, isn't that cool? So Candice, I was on your LinkedIn profile. I was doing a little bit more digging on you, and I loved your profile, how simple it was. And I want to ask you a couple things about it. And it reads, I'm a goal-oriented business professional living at the intersection of marketing, HR, and operations. I am an avid fan of entrepreneurial operating system, ESO for those in the know. I'm not in the know. What is ESO?
So,
or EOS, I'm sorry.
EOS, that's right. So it's the Entrepreneurial Operating System, and it's a way of operating businesses made popular by Gino Wickman. And he created a series of books. Some of the listeners may be familiar with Rocket Fuel. They may be familiar with Traction, or they may be familiar with Get a Grip. And so those are the 3 books that I'm familiar with him. But the Entrepreneurial Operating System basically says there are 5 things that you need to get right. And some of those things are your people, your systems, your process, and it just provides a really solid framework. And I have to tell you that I embedded the ABT process into the EOS process.
Is that right? Cool.
I did. So it's been really helpful for me to be able to convey and use that persuasive storytelling that that radio announcer used on his wife to get her PayPal account.
He's not a radio announcer. He's in radio sales.
In radio sales.
Probably especially effective for him.
Oh, well, now he's even more effective. Oh, my goodness. The way that I've applied it in my work is, really using that and but therefore in some of the elements of EOS, specifically the level 10 meeting. They have a meeting that has a very specific format, and we apply that in the work that I do today. But we set up the meeting using an ABT, which is really fascinating. So yeah, that's a little bit about EOS. Hopefully that answers your question.
Can you take us through just a little bit how you set up that meeting using the ABT? Give us an example of how the thought process you did there.
Yeah. So when we were trying to organize the team, and the EOS level 10 meeting is very strict in the way that they conduct the work, right? And it takes a little bit of time for the team members to be able to follow this strict format, especially if they're like, they love new methods, love new methodologies. They want to be really kind of right-brained and very creative. But we use the ABT process to get them focused. So in the meeting purpose, which we have for every single one of our meetings that we're executing, we basically say what the purpose of it. And here's our purpose for our level 10 meeting. We have so many opportunities in front of us, but busy work is not necessarily effective. Therefore, in this meeting, we're going to get focused on the right work.
So really boiled it down. Didn't even have an and in there, but didn't need it in this case.
Right. In this particular case, it didn't need it because they understand that setting at the upfront, the setting of the expectations, or the setting of the ordinary world. There's so many opportunities in front of us, and just even insinuating all of the opportunities creates a gazillion ands for us. Mm-hmm. So it's super powerful in that instance.
So, Candice, when did you first see storytelling or experience its power? Or is it something that's always been kind of innate with you and now you just are very intentional about it?
I think that it's something that I knew, but until I had heard some of the format, Park, that you had brought forward, it wasn't as distilled down. And I've used that ever since. So the very first time that I attempted to use it in my personal life was actually just a few years ago when I really, really understood the power of it. I read Save the Cat. Um,
Blake Snyder's great book.
yeah. Oh my gosh, what a fun time. So I read Save the Cat. I listened to the format that Randy Olson provided. And I had a interesting event earlier, just a few years ago, where my niece, at the tender age of 3, was diagnosed with cancer. It was just a very traumatic experience for the entire family. But a friend and I decided that, hey, let's do something to help. Let's make sure that the my brother and my sister-in-law were stable and solid and able to do everything that they needed to. So we set up a GoFundMe page. And the friend set up the GoFundMe page and kind of wrote a little bit of my niece's story. But I was like, you know what? Let me try the ABT method on this. But you know, let me see if this works. And I did it. And Park, it was so effective. We
Do you by
were.
chance remember what the ABT?
I do. I have it here, and it's a little bit of a longer story, but I'm willing to share it if you're willing to listen.
I would love to hear it.
Okay. So here's what I wrote. Imagine this. Your best friend in the whole wide world, the person you spend all your time with, is your twin. You look the same and you sound the same. You wear the same clothes. You love the same Disney princesses and you style your hair the same. You even eat every meal together. You and your bestie, you respond to the same name and you just chuckle watching your family get confused and laugh together at not being able to tell you apart. Your sister is your everything. But then one day, your sister isn't feeling so well. At first, she seems a little bit more tired than you. Then the person that had been your mirror image your whole life becomes just a little bit smaller than you. She gets a funny thing put in her nose, and her hair starts to fall out. You learn that she's sick. Your entire world buckles beneath you. You don't see your sister all day, every day like you used to. And when you do see her, she's pretty tired. She's still your best friend, so you become the best helper possible. You bring her what she asks for, you play with her when she has energy, and you hug your mommy and your daddy every day as a way to say thank you for their love. My niece is sick. Her twin is the best companion ever, and my brother and sister-in-law are proving to be some of the strongest people I know. And then I go on from there, Park, with a really strong call to action for anyone in my network to help them make it a little bit easier.
You've got the setup, which is the and structure, but she's sick. So you've got now the conflict, the contradiction to the wonderment up top, and now she's sick. And then the therefore is the call to action. Is here's what to do. How much money did you raise through that?
We raised over $20,000 in 3 weeks.
$20,000. That's amazing.
Yeah. And it was powerful because it allowed for her story to reach so many people. And I had so many different people reaching out to me or to my family, offering their support, offering their help, and sharing her story. So it went even further. And it was just, she was very well taken care of, and my family was able to stabilize in that process. So my brother and my sister-in-law were able to take care of her twin, which I thought was a really unique hook here for this particular story. And I thought taking the perspective of her twin might be the way to do it. And it really moved a lot of people.
And may I ask, how did she fare?
She is in remission. She's doing really well now.
How old is she?
She's now 5. She starts kindergarten in August. Yeah.
That is so awesome.
Mm-hmm.
She is so cool.
She is so spirited, so much fun. So I'm just so happy that I was able to help them in a small way. And it was just by taking what I had learned through story and helping to share her story.
Well, and Candice, and I imagine too, you probably heard from people that said, what a beautifully written story, or it just really touched me. And even in the business world, when you do this right and you use that ABT structure and even some longer form storytelling techniques, when you do it right, you move people to the point that they actually comment. They don't just buy something from you or show up, but they will say, I don't know what about that was, but it was really amazing, or you really touched me, or I loved that story. That's the bewitchery. So Randy and I were laughing because, of course, he's the PhD evolutionary biologist, and so he's the applied science of storytelling. And in our worlds, in the branding and sales and marketing and leadership coaching world, we are the bewitchery. We use that applied science in order to hack through the noise and hook the hearts of our customers. And that's what you did so beautifully with that GoFundMe campaign.
Yeah, it really did, but it shared the reality, right? It shared the circumstances, and yes, it bewitched people, but it transported them. One of my favorite ways to start stories is with imagine this. It's my version of Once Upon a Time.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And it allows people to kind of go into this alternative reality and really just get engrossed with it and enable them to see it. And I think that's part of the magic of it, right? You get to transport and go to this magical land that you don't ordinarily experience. But with enough description, you'll be there and feel it. And it's powerful.
Yeah, without a doubt. Now, you are a wordsmith, and in your particular work, words really matter. In fact, when I was working with your team a couple weeks ago in that webinar, the gentleman towards the end there asked me if I had a list of words I do use and a list of words I don't use, and I don't. I know the power of words, and maybe I'm probably falling back on my intuitive side too much, and I should create that words. And so I want to talk a little bit about that, but I want to start with how you use metaphor, again, to describe what you do as Senior Vice President of Operations at TTI Success Insights. And instead of just showing up with what you call a free and a dumb title, you do it a little bit differently.
I do. I love that expression. So titles are free and dumb. A friend of mine, his name is Jeremy. We were on a panel together, and I said, Jeremy, how do I introduce you? And he goes, doesn't matter. Just say I'm with this business because titles are free and dumb anyway. And I literally, my side hurt. I was laughing so hard because I was like, you know what? There's nothing more true. But if we can create a bridge for people that enables them to understand what we do, then they're able to get there a lot more faster. With what I do at TTI Success Insights, the company I'm working with, my title is Senior Vice President of Operations, which could mean a lot of different things. And often when I say that, people say to me, so what do you do? Which creates some of that confusion. So what I've discovered is the way that I create that bridge and tell that story for them is I say, hey, you know how WD-40 works? And someone says, yes. And I say, well, I'm the WD-40 of my organization. So across the entire organization, whenever there's a squeaky part, I kind of step into that space and I help someone to smooth out any squeaky parts in their process with their people, with their technology, and help them to understand what needs to be done. Now, while I'm kind of smoothing things out, I'm making sure that it's sustainable as well so that they don't have a squeak at a later point. But I try to leave any of those situations better than what I went into. So I think that's really the magic of WD-40. It's, you can go and fix that squeaky doorknob or that squeaky hinge, and the WD-40 works, and you step away and it's no longer squeaky and maintains that for a really long time. So I often say to people, I'm the WD-40, and I find that metaphor really helps to translate for someone what I do.
I love it. So in the branding world, I'll boil it down in 3 levels. So the very high level that is pretty much meaningless and, as you say, free and dumb is the Senior Vice President of Operations. Now, you are anything but dumb. So you have absolutely owned that in the logical minds of people, but they go, like you say, I don't know what that is. So in your branding world, now you in your description actually boil it down a little bit more. Let's get more specific about that. I work at the intersection of marketing, HR, and operations. Pretty interesting because a lot of people work at one of those places. They don't necessarily tie all 3 of them together. So now all of a sudden your own personal brand means more. And then you've done the really, really smart thing is let's have fun. Let's bring passion to it. Let's bring metaphor to it. And you say, quite simply, I'm the WD-40 around this place. And everybody gets that. It's a familiar way. It's a familiar title of operations told in a very novel way that people go, oh, I get it. And it's so visceral too. You can feel it when you say that versus that sort of sterile senior VP of ops.
Right. Or throwing data at them, right? That's one of the most important parts of storytelling. It's not just about data. It's not just about the numbers that I changed and that like, let me just throw some more metrics at you to explain what I do. Let me give you a metaphor and let me paint a picture in your mind. And I've been able to do that very well with WD-40 for people. That picture automatically conjures up for them what they do and tells them a story as opposed to throwing metrics and explaining away. So I've really focused on that. And I would love to hear from any of the listeners as well, if they have kind of that metaphor for their role as well. I always find that fascinating.
Well, I have a free and dumb title that I gave myself called The World's Most Industrious Storyteller. And I say that, with a little bit tongue in cheek. It's like, oh my God, that's like quite braggadocious. And so it's kind of fun in that respect. On the other side of it is, I work really, really hard at it. And how that came about was in a branding session when it was in November last year with a local ed tech company. And one of the people in the room said, let's go around the room and we're going to see what is the core brand essence of each person sitting here. So one of the designers, said, mine is creative design. Okay, he says, great. Someone in HR said, my superpower is connecting with people. I'm about engagement. Okay, great. And he went, and I had never been put on the spot like that before, Candice. And he got to me and he says, what's your, sort of smarty pants storytelling wise guy? What's your core essence? And I go, industrious storytelling. And it's like stopped him in his tracks. And I don't even know where it came from. It just popped out of my mind. And he looked at me and he smiled. And he goes, you know what? That's exactly what I would call you. So it comes back to finding a more interesting way of talking about this. And in fact, that title now graces the front of my book, but I wanted it to evoke an emotion in a picture of just plain hardworking storytelling. You use this to advance your brand, advance a cause, whatever. Get people to invest in a GoFundMe campaign to help your niece and her family. That's what stories do. Stories are very, very industrious when you use them correctly. And the key to that, you and I were talking about this after the webinar, and that was my aha. It's like, I got to get Candice on the show because in 256 shows, we've never covered this. The words you use, the metaphors you use, and so forth are so critical. And in your line of work with TTI Success Insights, you guys have a whole process, a brain scanning process. I know I went through it a year and a half ago when we had Dr. Ron Bonstetter on our show number 170, folks, if you're interested to learn about this process they do. But you all have actually gotten into the brains of people and see how they have lighted up depending on the words they use, the concepts you use. Can you talk a little bit about that? And then take us, on a bit of a journey on what you have learned about how to use just the right word, depending on who the audience is you're sitting across from.
Absolutely. So very well put about the brain lighting up as well. So at TTI Success Insights, we exist to reveal human potential. And we do that by helping people to become more aware of themselves, of the people around them, and the organizations that they're a part of. And what we specifically do in our space is deliver assessments. Some would call it personality profiles, but again, that's, I think, a little too lowbrow. I think that what we do instead is essentially deliver these profiles to people to help them to go further in their journey. So many different businesses out there, and maybe some of your listeners have heard about them, such as MBTI or some of the other assessment strengths
like
finders.
DISC,
Yeah, DISC,
Myers-Briggs, that kind of thing.
Myers-Briggs, yeah. So there are some profiles that are out there that allow for people to be essentially be grouped into different categories, and then create some insight about themselves. But we take a little bit of a different different approach. So what we do, and Dr. Ron Bonsetter, I believe, was your guest on that episode some time ago, and he's our senior vice president of research and development.
And he's great. He's such a character. He's such a
he's
smart guy and such a character all at the same time.
He is so much fun, and it's so fun to watch him and his energy at the front of the room, and then he lights up the room, but even more fun to watch his passion. And his passion is associated with helping people to uncover their potential and to understand what they do. And he leads our team and helps us to do so by not only developing these profiles and these categories and saying, well, I think this person belongs over here, but he actually looks inside someone's mind. And we have a brain lab at TTI Success Insights. And we actually, Park, maybe something worth sharing for the team again when, or for the listeners here, where you put the brain scan.
Yeah, I'll have to post a photo of that.
Oh, it was so fun. So we have a brain lab at TTI Success Insights where we're able to actually put a cap on somebody, and we're able to see how their brain is thinking about specific words that pop up on a screen. And those specific words that pop up on a screen will either light up one side of the brain or the other, and that will give us some type of indication as to if that person likes that word or dislikes that word. And that helps us to develop the questionnaire that we would use in this survey to help uncover this profile about a person and create really beautiful, customized reports and stories about people put into these unique reports. It's just so incredibly powerful.
So, Candice, it would be like if do my brain scan and then you do a brain scan and you and I are shared the same words. Your brain might be lighting up in different regions than mine did, depending on the word. Maybe let's just use the word investment. Will you invest in this? One of us, maybe my brain is kind of like, middle of the road. It's not a word that has major impact on me, but maybe yours lights up somewhere else. And it's like, oh, this is an important positive word for Candice. Is that kind of what you're saying, that we actually light up in different places?
We do light up in different places, and depending on the way that we're wired, either through nature or through nurture, we're seeing different words that help us to do that. So yeah, that word investment. Another one that is really kind of interesting and to see is something like balance, right? So if you're listening right now, just think about the word balance. And initially, does that word make you feel good, or does that word make you go, I don't care about it that much? But the beautiful thing about it, Park, is that we may articulate that, yep, we all like balance no matter what. But when we're actually have the brain scan on, we can see the nanoseconds and microseconds that people take to respond to that in their brain. So even though they might be articulating, yeah, balance sounds awesome, we can see by the way that their brain fires if they really like it or not, no matter what they're saying.
So they might, on one hand, think that they want me to like this word. So yeah, I like balance, but then they can actually boil down into the firing of the synapses and say, Park's brain hesitated there. He's BSing us. He doesn't really care that much about balance.
Yeah. And so not only does the brain hesitate, but we can actually see a flare in the firing on which side of your brain if you're trying to articulate something that you enjoy when you actually don't enjoy it. So if you see the word balance and you think, okay, it's socially acceptable for me to say, yes, I like balance, your brain will fire in a different way, and we can spot that on the brain scan.
So what do you do with this information? I know you have been doing this for a decade now, studying people, and you've got this wealth of information. What do you do with it?
Yeah, we've been doing it for a while. We've been doing it for 30 years.
Oh, my God. Really?
Yeah.
30 years, okay.
Yeah.
3 decades. But what do you do then with all this information?
What we do is deliver that and make the profiles that we're using even more effective, right? So we're able to help people the best way to express it, Park, is like, we see you and we recognize you and we appreciate you. And there is no right or wrong profile. That's the beautiful thing about this. And some other systems that might be in place might be saying, that's not exactly the right type. And it's never the case. Every human is unique and beautiful, and our unique talents and unique ability in the world is to be able to identify that. And so the way that I've been working with some independent entrepreneurs through TTI Success Insights is taking those words that work and words that don't work and actually applying it to story, which is really cool.
Can you give us an example?
Yeah. So the example that you had brought up before when we were on our webcast a few weeks ago, one of the participants raised his hand and said, "Hey, can you tell me which words I should use and which words I shouldn't use?" And I spoke up at that point and said, "Hey, take a look at the profile of your ideal customer and use those words in your stories to attract the ideal customer. And more importantly, use words that don't work for them. So that other side of the brain, that like hemisphere light up that says like socially acceptable to respond to this, but I don't really like it. Find those words that don't work for them and actually use the words that don't work to repel the anti-customer." So, said simply, find words that work to attract the ideal customer and use the words that don't work to repel the anti-customer.
Now, can anybody do this, or do you have to be a part of TTI to be able to have access to this information? And I guess that loaded question, let me load a little bit more on there. If I don't, how do I know what words work and don't work for my ideal customer?
Yeah. So, what we actually use is a model, we call it 12 driving forces. And what this helps us to measure is how somebody is motivated and what words work for them and which ones don't. There are actually 6 continuum that we take a look at TTI Success Insights to help us understand words that work and words that don't. And if I just walk through that right now and ask your listeners to think about this, is your ideal customer valuing knowledge over other things? Are they valuing utility over other things? How do they feel about their surroundings? How do they feel about the people around them, others? How do they feel about power? And how do they feel about methodology? So those are the 6 continua that we used. And I'll give you an example of the very first one. We mentioned knowledge before. And what we often like to say is that everyone values knowledge in one way, shape, or form. But there are 2 different sides of the continua. The first side of the continua is intellectual. And these people are typically, if you're scoring high in an intellectual score, you're typically driven by acquiring knowledge and just this desire to learn or seek out truth. So words that work for someone who is very intellectual would be things like learn and research and identify. But words that don't work are guess, apply, or intuitive. Now, Park, I've had the privilege of being able to see some of your scores in the past, and I know that you score pretty very high, or at least you were very intellectual on this continuum. So I imagine that the words—
I have so many people that would argue that point with you right now, Candice.
Would they? How many books have you read so far this year? Just kidding.
Oh, I don't know, but I just wrote one, so maybe that counts.
Yeah, that does count for something. So if you're targeting Park as your ideal customer, you would want to use the words like learn, research, and identify. And if you're targeting the opposite of Park, you might want to use those same words, but other things that would not work for someone who's the opposite end of Park would be like comprehensive, examine, or classify. So those are words don't work for the other end of the continua. So if you don't mind, Park, I'm just going to take a second to describe the opposite of you.
Okay.
Which we would call instinctive. So this is someone that's driven by using their intuition or their past experiences. So they often like kind of work from their gut. They're like, I've done this before. I know what I'm doing, and I don't need to necessarily read a lot or read everything exhaustively. But if I'm going to apply that reading to something specific that I need it for, I'll go there. So this is called instinctive. So words that don't work for the instinctive actually work for the intellectual. So it's just a matter of being able to identify which end of the continua you want to target and where you think your customers live. Now, something that I think would be really good, Park, is I will make sure that all of your listeners that are here today, I'll give you a link so that they can go and actually see what this assessment looks like and take a look at their own profile to understand what motivates and drives them as well.
So you've got it written such that you can read through that and people can look and determine what profile there is. They are just by feeling right about it, just like, yeah, that's me.
Yeah, I think that, so I could do two things. We can get, for all your listeners here, I'll give them essentially like a one pager where they could take a look at the different ends of the continuum and the words that work and words that don't, so that if they're working to tell a story to a particular audience and they know that that audience is very, very intellectual, they love to read, they love to write books, Park, maybe they're targeting you. um, we can build out that one pager and share that with everybody so that they can see it and say, where might my audience be and what might my audience be driven by, and then try to experiment with those words that work and those words that don't. But I'll
Mm-hmm.
also, I'll give out a link for the actual survey so that if they wanted to take, if your audience wanted to take it themselves, for those listeners out there, if you want to take it yourself, you can take a look at it and see what drives you.
Oh, that would be great. I might have to take that again. You know, when you were going through mine, since you did your homework, and I haven't looked at it in a long time, I would honestly say that I feel like I am much more of the instinctive type communicator, business person, leader, whatever, than intellectual. And yet you're saying my brain scan said the opposite because of what you said and how you went through this. I really value intuition, but then I like to attach it to like intention and how can you kind of codify it. I'm that reader you're talking about. I will scan until I find something that like, oh, this is important. I need to drill down into that, which sounds like maybe it's a little opposite of the intellectual. So I'm kind of curious because when you said that, I honestly was quite surprised. I do read a lot, but I never really thought of myself as an intellectual.
Interesting.
Yeah.
And I think it's important to recognize that the word, so thinking about yourself as an intellectual versus there is a label for this particular driving force. Right. So it's not saying Park is an intellectual. It's saying Park might be driven by knowledge. And the way that he acquires that knowledge is to either look expansively or to look instinctively. So it'll be really interesting to check out. But I think it's still an important thing to identify for your readers. So even if you can't go to opposite ends of the spectrum, to say that knowledge is really important for my particular audience. So how do I use words that make sure that I know that they are very driven by knowledge and bring them to my brand?
Right. Now, these six continuums, I want to go back through this again. You have 12 driving forces, and then you have these six continuums of does your audience value knowledge, utility, surroundings, meaning well, their office space, their home space. I mean, can you clarify what you mean by surroundings for me?
You hit the nail on the head, Park. Yeah, it's about their environment around them.
And some people might, can you give me an example of maybe someone you've run across that, because this had never occurred to me, that someone says at the top of their list is above everything else, I value my surroundings.
Yeah. Surroundings is again the spectrum that we're considering, or the keyword that we would think about. But the two opposite ends of the spectrum for surroundings, on one end is harmonious, and this is someone who's driven by their experience. Or when we brought up balance before, it's that concept of balance. I want things in my environment to be very beautiful, and I enjoy this experience. So, things that work for them, or the words that work for someone who's really about the harmony in their surroundings, is some words are subjective, or expression, or balance. Some words that don't work for that person who is very harmonious or driven by a harmonious style are things like dull, or compartmentalize, or function. And when you think about like form over function or function over form, the word function for someone that is very harmonious would be a word that would potentially turn them off. But if I flip to the opposite side now, Park, so we're on one side of the spectrum, but now we're going to the other side of the spectrum. The other side, we call that objective. And that's someone who is driven by the function and the objectivity and kind of the practicality around them. So some words that work for someone who is saying to their surroundings, I just needed to be practical, I just needed to be objective, is like reality and detach and factual. Some words that don't necessarily work for them are what works for the opposite side, which is harmony and beauty and subjective. Now, if for many marketers that are listening, and if you're not, but you've worked with makers before, what I've tend to notice is that many makers are very harmonious, right? They understand the aesthetic. They want things around them to be beautiful, and you'll see that expressed in a lot of different ways. So you might have seen that part because you've had an agency for quite some time, and I imagine
Yep.
you had some makers in there. So that harmonious driver, I think, might have been very apparent without necessarily labeling it that.
Well, and the interesting thing about makers, I'm glad you bring that up because the whole maker movement is really fascinating to me. There's lots I love about it, that combination of steampunk and technology and art and design and how you bring this all together. One of the coolest things I've ever been to was the Makers Fair up at San Mateo Fairgrounds, south of San Francisco. I took my two boys and met up with my good buddy, a guy I grew up with, Paul Herrick, and he brought his nephew with him, and we had so much fun for 2 days watching these makers. And as you were talking about that, it's on one hand, it's harmonious, but they're also disruptive because they will do a maker to me will do interesting, surprising things with like trash. For instance, there's one artist up there, Neo, and I can't remember his last name, but I'll track it down and put a link in the notes. He would go out to the local garbage dump and bring back just cool, like cast off iron things and wood things and whatever, and build the coolest looking like robots. They weren't actually functioning, but they were like pieces. And on one hand, they were beautiful. On the other hand, they were kind of creepy. But it was just such incredible use of just castaway stuff. So I'm digressing here, but what I love about it is, and I come back to what you're talking about here with these continuums, is they must overlap. There must be real dimensions. So someone could be a surroundings type maker person, but also have a bent on power. And those two worlds come together like archetypes do. One may be more dominant than the other, but they color each other.
And they may be very situational, and not necessarily fire all the same time in the same ways. They may go into different environments or different situations in which a driver would make itself very apparent, either because it basically got stimulated or it got challenged. So you may find that someone who is harmonious, that is preparing for a fair, will go into a junkyard and all of a sudden this harmonious style will pop up. But in other situations, like you mentioned, the power factor really shows up in a different way. Maybe it's that they want to have their own art show, but they also want to, make this beautiful art. So it definitely fires in different ways. The way that we organize it at TTI Success Insights is that we look at a hierarchy. So we say that there are primary driving forces. So those are the ones that motivate you to action. There are what we call situational. So depending on the environment that you're in, they'll either fire or they won't. And then there are indifferent driving forces. And the indifferent can show up in one of two ways. They'll either show up by not motivating someone to action. So if you mention it and it does nothing for someone, they're like, okay, it's just words. But the other thing that they'll do is they'll actually reverse the action. So if you ask someone to do something and you're using a driver that doesn't necessarily stimulate for them, they'll actually repel and actually push against it and say, I'm going to do the opposite of that because that doesn't work for me. That's not what's driving me.
Yeah, and I'm listening to you explain this, and I just keep seeing the multi dimensions of it because we talked about knowledge, utility, surroundings, and then you have others, power, and methodology. But then, so is there any one place, or has there been a book written, or anywhere that people can go, or is that a part of your TTI group and membership, that you can go in and identify these and find these word lists that our writers out there, our storytellers out there could rely on or kind of help guide them in how they tell a story?
Yeah, so the background behind what we've built at TTI Success Insights for 12 driving forces comes from a body of work by the man by the name of Edward Spranger. And he was a German psychologist, teacher, educator, who basically came up with this book in 1928 called Types of Men that really dove deep for the very first time in documented history into what might drive somebody to action, what motivates them. When the founder at TTI Success Insights, the late Bill Bonstetter, found this body of work, he found that it was powerful, but he really wanted to apply it into the business setting. the body of work, if the any of the listeners would want to listen to it, would be Types of Men. But like I said, the concepts that we're talking through are primarily distributed or only distributed through TTI Success Insights. But I'm happy to get that sheet so that any of the storytellers that are listening here can use those words that work and actually build their own too. So what I found as a marketer is, I had a starting place with some of the words that did work for the stories that I had built. And I started to kind of build out this book of words or this bank of words that I could use depending on who I wanted to motivate to action.
I hope you're enjoying today's show with Candice, and we are going to be back with her right after this. Do you suffer from brand doubt? It's the malaise you wake up to in the middle of the night trying to figure out where your company is headed. It's that pit in your stomach you get driving into the office wondering, how are you going to inspire your people with a blurry vision and an unclear mission? That dread of knowing your competition is pilfering your customers because they don't know what you stand for, and therefore you don't stand out. The frustration of knowing you have a remarkable brand story to tell, but it isn't exactly mesmerizing, at the moment anyway. But you don't have to feel that way anymore. I know, because I've been there myself. That's why I wrote Brand Bewitchery, to help you overcome the frustration, exhaustion, and expense of a brand story that is impotent rather than inspiring. Brand Bewitchery is based on my 35 years crafting brand story strategies that have helped companies grow by as much as 600%. It guides you through my proven story cycle system to help you craft spellbinding stories that dramatically grow your business. Plus, as the world's most industrious storyteller, I teach you how to use 3 proven narrative frameworks to increase your influence, persuasion, and confidence. And I even include a foolproof plan, and I should know, on how to activate your story into the world for immediate impact. Order your print or Kindle copy of Brand Bewitchery now on Amazon. There's even a companion Brand Bewitchery online course you can take right now at businessofstory.thinkific.com. I promise you that the storytelling exercises, case studies, and resources in both the book and the course will help you excel through the stories you tell. Story on, my friend. Now let's get back to Candice Frazer of TTI Success Insights. When did you first see this in action? And let me back up a little bit. When you were first hired there, so this had to have been fairly new to you. When did you see it in action and go, wow, this actually is a thing? These words really do motivate and move people.
Yeah. The very first time that I got exposed to the 12 driving forces was during my interview, which was 4 years ago at TTI. I had relocated, or I was in the process of relocating to Phoenix from Chicago.
And can I interrupt real quick and ask you, what were you doing before TTI?
I was at a small boutique agency in Chicago. Had family here, so I wanted to be closer to my family. But we were working on social media marketing, storytelling, purpose-driven brands, helping them to tell their stories in the market a bit better. And I had worked with a number of different brands, General Mills, Red Wing Shoes, 1-800-Contacts, having a great time getting their stories out. Even Health Warrior. They're a smaller based food brand in Richmond, Virginia. So I hadn't heard about the 12 driving forces until I went for my interview park. And the very first time that I had experienced the power of it was when I was still a candidate. I brought the report and the words that work and the words that don't home to my husband. And I was like, I don't know, maybe this is me, maybe it's not. And he's like, oh, they nailed you.
So he read your report.
He read. I handed him my report. I'm like, I don't know. Do I really? And he's like, yes, you do. So it was really fun, really fascinating. But then the second that I came into the business and that I saw the power behind it, and I understood how the tool was structured and the methodology behind it, and how we kind of launched off of Edward Spranger's work, I started to really understand the power of words and these particular words based on how my audience is motivated, and started leveraging that as soon as I possibly could. So for our audience tends to be driven a bit more by that utility. They're independent entrepreneurs. They want to grow their businesses. So for them, I'm using a lot of words like ROI, profit, maximize, benefits, really focusing on those so that it resonates with them in a powerful way.
And so you became a believer very quickly then.
Not only a believer, but a practitioner. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I tried it and it was true. So I kept going with it and hasn't failed me since.
By the way, Candice, as you were going there, in all honesty, I was multitasking on you because I had that name in my head and I go, who was that artist? And I pulled it up online, Nemo Gould, Nemo Gould, Gould. I know a total rabbit hole tangent here, but his art from a maker standpoint is so cool.
I'm gonna check him out, Park.
Yeah,
What that name like that, and testimonial from you, got to take a look.
It's fun stuff. So now, when you are working with your people out there, how hard is it or not to get them to really understand that you can't just show up in front of any audience and spew the same thing? And I say spew the same thing because we all default back to, can be lazy to just like, and I do this and features and functions, and not thinking about that audience. And quite honestly, it didn't hit me until that guy asked me about that in the webinar. And I thought, maybe I need to be more rigorous in the words that I choose to use, that I've been doing it intuitively, but not with great intention.
Mm-hmm. We have a independent entrepreneur in our network. His name is Chris Young, and he articulates this in a beautiful way. He says, there are get-its and there are never gonna get-its. So you got to get to your get-its and not even work with your never gonna get-its. So a lot of times when I'm working with these entrepreneurs, all I have to do is put the stories of Chris Young, someone who knows this, and he knew it before I even did, and share their stories and allow for those experiences to live and to breathe and to grow organically on their own, makes a case for others. So, the answer is tell a really great story to other people in order to incite them to action. Because what we'll see is that the ones who are using it in that very intentional way, Park, and are able to articulate it in a very intentional way are the ones that are truly driving success for their businesses.
How much pushback do you get from some of your people that says, that storytelling stuff doesn't work, it's just a gimmick?
I don't get much, honestly. I feel like story has become very ubiquitous and very much employed by many people. I was on giving a presentation this morning at 9 a.m. to a group of independent entrepreneurs via our boot camp. Super smart people coming and learning about the tools and the resources that we have. And one of the questions that I got asked up front is, how do we use storytelling to help people find us? And that completely unprompted. So I feel like entrepreneurs know this. I feel like business leaders know this. They know the power of story. And then if they don't, the very first exercise I take them through, and the first thing I say to them is, you always need to know who's your who. Who is your who? And you start there. And so I take them through an exercise where they're building the profile and they're identifying the driving forces for their ideal customer. And I say, use those words that work, and also use the words that don't work for the opposite side. So that way you're bringing the right customer to you. And automatically the lights, it's like a light bulb literally over their head lights up. And they're like, I never thought about it like that. I didn't consider that before, but I'm going to do that now. So it's not a hard sell, Park. It's really not.
Storytelling seems like it just has become so ubiquitous lately. And a lot of people are like, I'm a great storyteller. And then you hear them and they're like, no, you're actually not, but we could work on it. We can get you there. But that idea of who is your who is interesting. I was on an impact call yesterday with actually two of them, two different groups, an engineer from Intel and a video production animation firm from Vancouver, BC. So I get to work across a lot of spectrums when it comes to industries. And I asked both of them. One of them was a very veteran in the industry world. The other one, a husband and wife video team. And when I jumped on their website, I was really impressed with the work they did, called Up Media. But I asked both of them the same question, separate calls. I didn't ask who is your who. I asked, who are you for? I mean, what is your one ideal customer? And they have such a hard time. Everybody has such a hard time articulating that. Do you see the same thing when you're working with them, when they look at you like, who's my who? I have no idea. And if so, how do you help them get to who their who is?
What I find, Park, is that there's typically a 50-50 split. And I give these boot camp presentations once a month to our network of entrepreneurs. And we go through the exercise, and at the end of the exercise, where I'm asking them to build or to identify the driving forces of their ideal customer, at the end I ask them, hey, raise your hand if that was easy for you. And half the room raises their hand. And I say, now raise your hand if that was kind of tough. And the other half raises their hand. And what I say to them at that point is, good thing for those of you who might be challenged with this right now, that they make pencils with erasers. The best thing to do, in my opinion, is to gut it out, to make an assumption and use that as your hypothesis for a starting point. And then try it. Be a risk taker and go for it and see if it bears the fruit that we're hoping that it will bear by using the right words with the right stories to the right audience.
Using your assumption as a hypothesis. So they are assuming, this is my ideal customer. These are the kinds of people I want to work with, and then go and try it out. And you might be close. You might be way off, but you're probably pretty doggone close, I would think. I mean, it comes from your gut, doesn't it?
Yeah, it does. And there's that instinctive driver again there, Mark. But what you might, right? There it is. It shows up. Let's just say that you say, hey, I think my person is both instinctive and harmonious. Like, let's try. Let's see what happens. And what I've found more often than not is, yes, that they instinctively know. They know who lights them up. They know who they jump out of bed to work with in the morning. They know that. Mm-hmm. But sometimes it's just cementing or even putting the hypothesis around it and saying, I'm going to go for it and just confirm that what I think is true is actually true. They are driven by this. And I should use those words because that makes my life so much easier and makes my stories resonate even more.
Yeah, words matter. They're either going to work for you or work against you, so be wise in how you pull them together. Do you have that link off the top of your mind, or is it something that we'll need to create and put in the show notes that we could send our folks to?
Yeah, let's put that link into the show notes.
Okay.
Sometimes it's a little bit longer and kind of a little bit of gobbledygook, but we can put it into the show notes and then let everyone experience it from there. And I really do think that it might be insightful for many other people. And if it's not, you could always test it with your spouse and he'll or she'll confirm it for you.
That's perfect. Well, give me that link. I'll shorten it. I'll get a bit.ly link out of it. And then at the end of this show, I'll record the close and have it in there for everybody. And we'll put it in the show notes as well. But I've taken it. It is really fascinating. And I got to tell you, Michelle responded the same way your husband did when I said, is this really me? And she looked at it. And I mean, I don't even know if she said anything. She was like, humph and said, yes, threw it on the ground. Like, what's your deal, man?
I will never, ever forget when my husband said, oh, they nailed you. They nailed you. It was one of the best moments.
Well, Candice, thank you so much for taking the time. I know you got an incredibly busy world there, and in this whole COVID thing, it makes it even crazier. So thank you for taking the time to be on the show today.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Park. Like I said, this has definitely brought my world full circle. But I am part of the storytelling tribe. I love it. And if I can ever be of help to you or any of your listeners, please reach out to me. Love to connect.
What's the best place to find you?
LinkedIn is my platform of choice, so they can find me as Candice Frazer on that platform.
Frazer.
That's correct.
Yep. And I think you're the first one that pops up there, maybe the only one that pops up there.
That'd be nice.
Candice, thanks so much, and enjoy your weekend.
All right. Thanks, Park. You too.
Hey, and thank you for coming along on our journey with Candice today. If you liked what you heard, by all means, share this episode with friends, family, colleagues, clients, bosses, whomever you know who would like to grow as a storyteller using the right words that work. And visit our show notes because we have 2 bonuses there for you. You can take a free driving forces assessment. It'll take you about 15 to 20 minutes to go through the Q&A with it, but it will help inform you how you fall within this continuum that she was talking about and what words work for you. Plus, there's also a worksheet that you can download, have it by your desk side, so as you're writing and you're thinking about your audiences and find their words, the ones that really resonate with them, and maybe even more importantly, the words that don't work for them. Of course, I would like to share my book with you, Brand Bewitchery. If you haven't ordered your print or Kindle copy yet, by all means, head on over to Amazon. And if you leave me a rating and review, I would be hugely appreciative of it. And if you haven't yet taken our online course, the book and the course work great together. You can see it. The first chapter is free of the online course. Find that at businessofstory.thinkific.com. In that first chapter, you will identify and declare what your number 1 position is in the marketplace, and you're going to learn the ABT and but and therefore exercise to teach you how to talk about your brand in the market. And of course, if I can be of service to you at any time, visit me at businessofstory.com. I will be right back here next week with another story artist to help you craft and tell compelling stories that sell. And until then, remember that the most potent story you will ever tell is the story you tell yourself. So make it a great one. Thanks for listening.